I think the phenomenon of aphantasic creativity I find particularly interesting. So, as I've mentioned, a number of aphantasic artists have been in touch, but also aphantasic novelists, for example, who say that they can write descriptive passages which evoke imagery in their readers, but not in them. One of the and clearly other forms of creativity are perfectly compatible with aphantasia. So, for example, one of our star speakers and participants in our research has been Ed Catmull, who was the president of Pixar, who won the Turing Prize for his discoveries in computer animation. He realized he was aphantasic when a friend of his, who was a meditator, asked him to visualize a sphere as a simple meditation induction procedure, and Ed realized that he couldn't see anything in his mind's eye, and he sort of didn't think too much of this, thought it was a bit odd, didn't reflect on it, but then for various reasons he got thinking about this down the line, and he began asking people he worked with whether they had imagery, and it turned out that his favourite animator, who's a guy called Glenn Keane, who did many of the drawings for The Little Mermaid, was aphantasic and had recognised this for a long time, and had arguments with his mentors who'd said, but you must be able to see things in your mind's eye. How can you draw otherwise? And he'd said, well, I don't, but I can. So it's clear that the ability to visualize is important to creativity in some people with imagery, but it certainly doesn't preclude creativity and imagination in those with aphantasia. So I think it's given quite an interesting and unexpected insight into the nature of imagination, if you like, and the nature of creativity, which one might, I think you might have assumed had a much tighter link to sensory imagery than it seems to.
Yeah, I was particularly surprised because in the span of time between my studies at university, I wrote science fiction novels. Yeah. And for me, it was like spending 6 hours a day at least in my imagination, not realizing that I wasn't actually ever in my imaginations.
Yeah. So how would you characterize the kind of imagination you were using to write those novels?
It's so hard to say, as I'm sure that you're aware, but for me, I always come back to this idea of just, I have the knowing of what I'm thinking of, but I don't see it. I know what the image should look like, but there is no image. And it is very sparse for me. I don't know if that's common for most people with aphantasia, but it's very like hyper focused on a specific detail that I'm moving between.
Mm-hmm. Would you say you have a strong spatial sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because that's one interesting dissociation, if you like, that's come to light. So one of the questions which we asked people in the original questionnaire at the suggestion of a psychologist colleague of mine was, can you count the number of windows in your apartment or your house without leaving your chair? And most people with aphantasia say they can do that. Mm-hmm. But they say they don't use imagery. They have some kind of schematic outline map, which enables them to do it. Or sometimes they imagine cleaning them, or they imagine doing something, and that suggests that maybe there's a kind of spatial imagery which isn't very rich experientially, but nevertheless is useful. And there's a bit of evidence that indeed spatial imagery is distinct from object imagery, which is what seems to be lacking in people with aphantasia, and spatial imagery might even be stronger in some people with aphantasia than usual, and spatial imagery may be linked to mathematical thinking, so it could sort of link into the STEM association.
There was a study, and I believe it was a study. I might just be misremembering some things here, but perhaps you can pick up this thread if it rings any bells for you. But wasn't there some study where they had people describe how many objects were in a room, and people with aphantasia were able to, they got less items, but they were more accurate, whereas people without aphantasia made more mistakes, but could pick out more items.
So it's essentially copying a drawing after a delay, and the result was exactly as you describe. There's also a questionnaire which tries to tease out spatial imagery from object imagery. And this distinction does have a kind of neurological basis. So there are two main streams of visual processing in the brain. There's a stream that goes from the visual cortex down into the temporal lobe, which is sometimes called the what stream, which seems to be involved in recognizing things, essentially. So it's got a high acuity vision, color vision, form. But then there's another stream that goes up into the parietal lobe, which has more to do with controlling movement under visual guidance. Originally it was called the where stream, it's sometimes called the how stream. So it may be that object imagery and spatial imagery involve activity in one or other of these two streams. So that could be the basis for this dissociation, possibly. And it seems that imagery in the what stream is experientially richer than imagery in the where or the how stream.
Yeah.